Welcome to my philosophy channel. The most powerful man who ever lived once sat alone in a tent at the edge of his empire and wrote, in his own hand, that he could not control his own thoughts. He ruled the known world. He did not rule himself. The journal he never meant for anyone to read still answers a question almost no one alive today knows how to ask. This video runs a little long. If you stay with me to the end, you might begin to see what real power looks like, not the kind that gives orders, but the kind that finally stops being given them. Chapter 1. The Emperor Who Could Not Quiet His Mind. A man sits in a military tent on the cold edge of the Danube, writing by the light of a single lamp. Outside the tent, beyond the watchfires, 30 legions sleep or wake or die. Inside, the man is not writing dispatches. He is not writing law. He is not writing a speech for the Senate. In the small hours, on a wax tablet meant for no one but himself. He is writing about a problem he has not been able to solve in 20 years. He cannot quiet his own mind. The man is Marcus Aurelius. He rules roughly 60 million people. His name carries the weight of armies from the cold British coast to the deserts of Syria. He can order a city built, a man executed, or a province redrawn before breakfast. Almost no one in human history has held the kind of authority he holds, and on the page, in his own private hand, the word he returns to most often is failure. What he writes about is not the empire. It is not the war on the frontier or the plague that has emptied his palace of children. It is something quieter and stranger. Anger he cannot prevent. Anxiety he cannot reason out of. A mind that keeps slipping its leash, even though every other living thing in the empire is on a leash he holds. The most obeyed man on earth cannot get himself to obey. This makes him, almost by accident, the most honest psychological experiment in recorded history. Other thinkers wrote about the inner life from quiet libraries, in clean robes, with time. He wrote during plague years, between battles, while burying his own children one after another. If a method does not survive that kind of weight, it does not survive. What lives in his journal is whatever lived through him. Most of us assume that more freedom outside the body produces more freedom inside it. Money, power, options, distance from anyone who can tell us no. Surely, if you stacked enough of these high enough, the noise in the head would finally go quiet. Marcus had the stack. The noise did not go quiet. He spent decades learning, slowly and against his preference, that the two things had never been connected to begin with. You've seen this in smaller versions. The friend who finally got the salary, the house, the title, and still cannot sleep at night. The founder who built the company and now sits inside it like a hostage. The person who left the bad relationship and carried the same panic into the next one. They moved every chair in their lives, and the chair that mattered was somewhere they could not reach. Something refuses to transfer when we change the furniture. What Marcus saw, alone in that tent, was that he had been working on the wrong kingdom his entire life. There were two of them. One stretched from the Atlas Mountains to the Black Sea, full of marble and soldiers and weather. The other was about 3 inches across and lived behind his eyes. He had been emperor of the first since he was a boy. He had barely set foot in the second. The strange part was that everyone had access to the second kingdom. The slave carrying his water had one of exactly the same size. So did the soldier dying on the wall. So did the farmer in a village whose name no record would ever keep. Power did not enlarge it. Poverty did not shrink it. It was the one piece of territory whose borders did not move when a person's fortunes did. There is a passage where he writes, almost in irritation with himself, "Get up, then. Get up like a man. Stop rolling over." He is talking about a morning. about a body that does not want to leave the bed. The emperor of half the world is fighting a private war with a blanket, and losing, and writing about it because winning that small war was beginning to feel harder than winning the visible one. He kept the journal close for the rest of his life. He never published it. He never showed it to a friend. He had no intention of teaching anyone anything. He was one tired man trying to survive his own head, and the fact that this turned out to be the only thing worth writing down is the first quiet warning his life delivers to ours. 2,000 years later, almost everything he ruled is gone. The sentence he wrote to himself in the dark is the only thing still standing. Chapter 2. The Gap Between the World and Your Story of It. A messenger arrives in the doorway with a sealed letter. And before the seal is even broken, the body has already chosen a meaning. The shoulders tighten, the chest narrows, the breath shortens by a fraction. None of this comes from the letter. The letter is still folded. It comes from what the mind has decided in the half-second before reading about what the letter is. This happens so fast, in all of us, that we mistake the mind's verdict for the world's news. Marcus noticed this. Most people never do. He kept arriving at the same observation, in different words, for years. Nothing that reaches us bare. Between the event and our reaction, there is always a sentence, fast, silent, automatic, that tells us what the event means. We do not respond to the event. We respond to the sentence, and the sentence, unlike the event, was written by us. Picture the small versions you already know. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and within a second, you have given that stranger an entire biography. Arrogant, careless, the kind of person who. A boss writes a one-line email, "Can we talk?" And by the time you reread it, your stomach has already been told a story about your job. A partner sighs at dinner, and a whole argument exists before either of you has spoken. In every case, the event is small and neutral. A car changes lanes. A keyboard sends 3 words. Air leaves a person's mouth. The suffering is not in any of these. The suffering is in the sentence that runs underneath them, so quickly and so close to the bone that we cannot tell it apart from the event itself. We feel the verdict and call it the truth. What Marcus discovered slowly was that there is a space between the two. A space the size of a breath, where the event has happened but the verdict has not yet been sealed. In that space, a person can step in. The space is small. It is also the only place in a human life where real freedom turns out to live. He trained himself, year after year, to find that space. When a senator's letter offended him, he would pause before believing the offense. When his own grief rose at the death of a child, he would let the grief have its weight without letting it author conclusions about the universe. He was not trying to feel less. He was trying to keep his feelings honest by not letting them write history. This applies to praise the same way it applies to criticism. When the Senate cheered a policy, he reminded himself that the cheer was a sound, not a verdict on his soul. When a soldier called him great, he reminded himself that words said about him were not him. The training works in both directions, catching the insult on the way in and catching the flattery, which is the more dangerous of the two anyway. What this means in plain terms is uncomfortable. Most of what hurts us is something we are doing to ourselves slightly after the fact, and so fast that we never see it happen. The traffic is neutral. The email is neutral. The sigh is neutral. The pain comes in afterwards, dressed in the costume of reality, and we never check its papers. Marcus spent a lifetime learning to check the papers. This is not the same as pretending nothing happened. He did not stand at the funerals of his children and tell himself the deaths were merely an interpretation. He cried. He grieved. But he did not let the grief say things about his life that grief was not qualified to say. A feeling is allowed in the room. It is not allowed to write the verdict for the room. The discipline is small, and it never stops being needed. The sentence keeps writing itself. The body keeps tightening half a second too early. The only thing that changes, with practice, is how often you can step into that narrow space between the world and your story of the world, and decide, for once, what kind of sentence to put there. The letter, you may notice, is still in your hand. You have not read it, and you are already deciding what it is going to do to you. Chapter 3. The two kingdoms you were born into. There is a moment, on the morning of every battle, when the emperor has done everything he can do, and the battle has not yet started. The maps are folded. The orders are given. The legions are arranged where the generals wanted them. From this point onward, the day belongs to wind, to the temper of the men on the front line, to a single officer who might signal wrong, to the choices of an enemy he will never see breathing. Marcus stands inside his tent and feels the line again. He has felt it 100 times before. On one side of that line stood everything he could do. On the other side stood everything that would actually happen. The line was clean. He had not drawn it. No emperor draws it. It is built into the structure of being alive, and most people walk across it 100 times a day without ever noticing it is there. Marcus, by his 50s, could not stop noticing. Inside the line is a small territory. His own attention, his own judgments, the way he chose to respond to whatever the next hour brought, the quality of effort he put into things, while they were still his to put effort into. Almost everything else lies outside it. The weather, other people's choices, other people's opinions of him, the outcomes of his work, his reputation, now and after his death, his body, slowly in the end. You know this line, even if you have never named it. There is the parent watching a grown child make a decision they cannot stop. The job candidate staring at a phone that will ring when it rings. Or the patient in a corridor while someone in another room reads a scan. There is a specific quality to that kind of waiting. It is the feeling of the line being visible. Most human exhaustion, Marcus realized, comes from spending an entire life on the wrong side of that line. Trying to control whether your work is appreciated. Trying to control whether someone loves you back. Trying to control the future, which has never once cooperated with anyone's plan for it. Energy poured across the line is energy poured into sand. It does not return, and while it leaks away, the small inner kingdom, the only one you actually own, goes untended. The first time a person sees the line clearly, the reaction is usually fear. The kingdom that is actually yours turns out to be much smaller than you thought, and the one you have spent your life trying to rule was mostly never yours at all. But a second feeling follows the fear if you sit with it. Relief. A tired, animal kind of relief. You can finally stop carrying what was never yours to carry. The line is not always where people expect it to be. Your emotions, in the first instant they arise, are not entirely inside your kingdom. Anger comes up the way the wind comes up. Grief arrives the same way. What is inside your kingdom is what you do with them after the first second, once the surprise has passed and the choice opens. Most of what people call my problem turns out, on inspection, to belong to someone else. What he said about me, whether they will hire me, whether this turns out well, whether they understand. The whole sentence has a subject that is not you. To live mostly inside that kind of sentence is to spend a life as a guest in other people's houses, knocking, waiting, hoping the door opens, treating yourself as a footnote in the lives of strangers. Seeing the line does not make a person passive. Marcus did not stop fighting battles. He fought harder, but he fought inside his kingdom. He brought everything he had to the part of the day that was actually his. The planning, the discipline, the attention, the response. And then, when the line came, he let go of the rest. Whatever the day gave back, he received without bargaining. The practice, in an ordinary life, is unspectacular. You write the email and release the reply. You say what you need to say and stop arranging the listener's face. You raise the child as well as you can, and the adult they become is not yours to author. The work goes out into the world, and the world does what it wants with it. The only choice that ever lived inside your kingdom was how seriously you took the doing. Almost everything you have ever lost sleep over was on the wrong side of a line you could have stopped crossing at any time. Chapter 4. The View from Where the Stars Stand. On the cold nights at the frontier, Marcus would step outside the tent and look up. The watchfires were small things from where he stood. Beyond them, the camp slept. Beyond the camp, the forests went black for hundreds of miles. Above all of it, the sky was open in a way no city sky has ever been open since. He stood there for a long time, alone, while the breath came out of him in white plumes, and the constellations turned slowly above his head, indifferent to who he was. Something happens to a person who looks up like that for long enough. The arguments of the day grow smaller. The letter he was angry about an hour ago seems somehow farther away. The grief that had been pressing on his chest does not disappear, but it loosens, the way a hand loosens around something it has been gripping too tightly. He was not escaping. He was being given his actual size back. What started as an instinct became, over decades, a deliberate practice. He gave it no name in his journal. We could call it the view from above. The mind, he found, could be trained to climb the way the eyes climbed on those cold nights at the frontier. The trouble did not vanish from the climb. It came back at the proportion it actually had, instead of the proportion fear had given it. The technique was concrete. He would begin where he was. Say, in a room, looking at the surface of a desk. He would pull his awareness back, slowly, until he could see himself sitting at the desk. Back further, until he saw the room, the house, the city walls. Further still, until the empire he ruled appeared as a thin, pale line wrapping the inside of a continent. The man at the desk became impossibly small. Time worked the same way. He could place himself in the long line of people who had ruled cities, and the line stretched in both directions until it vanished. Empires before Rome had risen, panicked about their own emergencies, and gone underground. Empires after Rome would do the same. The barbarian he was about to send men against had a mother who would forget him within a generation. Given enough generations, the emperor giving the order would be forgotten too. None of this was denial. The Plesk was still killing his people. The frontier was still in flames, and his children were still dying in the next room. The view from above does not erase any of this. It only restores the proportions that fear, sitting too close, had distorted. A man drowning in 3 feet of water dies the same as a man drowning in 30. He had to remember which depth he was in. You have done this without naming it. The window of a plane on a long flight, when cities below look like circuit boards and the problem that filled your apartment becomes harder to remember. A hospital corridor at 3 in the morning, when the things you fight about at work fall off. The morning back from a funeral, when half of what mattered yesterday no longer does. The feeling never lasts, and most of us never name what it was. The view from above also changes how you see other people. The man who is bothering you today is, at the same time, a child who once cried himself to sleep, someone's brother, someone's son, a body that will be in the ground within 50 years. None of this excuses him. The size of his offense, seen from far enough away, is rarely the size you first gave it. The same applies to yourself. From far enough away, your worst days look like a small, dark patch in a long stretch of weather. Your best days look the same. The promotion that felt like the meaning of the year fades by the next year. The humiliation that felt like the end of the world fades faster. Marcus did not write this to make himself feel small. He wrote it to keep his work bigger than his moods about it. What this gives is a strange kind of freedom, the freedom to engage without drowning. He went back into every meeting, every battle, every grief, with the same effort he would have brought before. But he did not bring the panic. The panic had been the smallness of his field of view, mistaken for the size of the trouble. With a wider view, the trouble stayed real, and the panic mostly went home. Look up sometime soon. The thing you are carrying may not be the size you have been treating it as. Chapter 5. The teacher you try not to look at. On the day of a Roman triumph, a slave stood behind the general's chariot and whispered, again and again, into his ear, "Remember that you will die." The crowd throws flowers. The Senate stands. Slaves carry plunder from the conquered cities. The general, at the height of his life, rides through the city with that one sentence pressed against the back of his head. It is meant as a warning. It was also a gift. The man who has just won everything is being reminded gently that he will lose it, so that he can do something useful with the time between. Marcus did not need a slave behind him to remember. He kept the whisper inside his own head, on purpose, every day of his adult life. Not because he was morbid, because he had discovered something that almost no one wants to look at long enough to discover. The fact of dying, kept close, does something to a life that nothing else can do. It wakes the life up. The instinct of most people, when death is mentioned, is to put it gently down and step away. We do this in small ways, with our parents' old age. We do it in big ways, with our own. We keep moving fast enough that the subject does not catch us. Marcus did the opposite. He sat down beside it. He looked at it. And in looking, he learned that the thing was not what he had assumed. The practice he developed was simple, almost embarrassingly so. Each morning, before the day had begun, he reminded himself that this might be his last day. He held it quietly, the way one holds a true thing that is not yet urgent. The man in the next tent might not see evening. The child in the next room might not see the year. He himself might be a body by sundown. What happens to a person who takes this in is hard to describe. The mind, which has been treating life as a long, flat road, suddenly sees that the road ends. The trivial begins to reorder itself. Some argument you are going to have today fades into the background, while a phone call to your mother quietly moves to the front of the line. The hierarchy of what matters reshuffles, the way a kaleidoscope reshuffles when it is turned. He had a deeper version of this practice too. He would imagine the people he loved being gone. His wife on some morning, a child whose breathing had stopped, his own body letting go in some particular bed. This sounds cruel until you have done it. People who lose someone suddenly often say the same thing. I would have held them differently if I had known. Marcus held everyone as if he had known. Our age does the opposite. We have removed death from the house, taking people to hospitals to die, building cemeteries on the outskirts, softening the language until we cannot quite see what we are saying, passing, gone, no longer with us. We have insurance against it, and pills to delay it, and screens to distract us from thinking about it. We have never been so insulated from death, and never so afraid of it. What this avoidance costs us is hard to see from inside it. We sleepwalk. Hours go to arguments we will not remember in a year. Grudges are kept that will follow us into the ground. We tell our loved ones we will see them on Sunday and assume, without checking, that we will. The slave in the chariot is gone. He was always speaking to all of us, and we have made it very quiet in our chariots. There is a strange thing that people who work near death notice. Hospice nurses, doctors who have been with enough dying people, soldiers in long wars. They will tell you that those closest to the end are often the most alive. The window narrows, and what is left inside it becomes vivid. Colors are louder. A daughter's hand is heavier. Food tastes like food. None of it is theory anymore. Marcus did not need to be dying to live this way. He trained himself never to forget where the day was heading. The whisper in the chariot became his own voice in his own head, and it did not depress him. It thinned what was unnecessary. By the end of his life, he had buried his children, his closest friend, and most of his health. And he was still writing about how to be useful in the morning. Look, briefly, at the thing you have been refusing to look at. It is the only one that can tell you what your life was for. Chapter 6. The citadel no army has ever entered. There are people whose entire weather depends on a single text message that has not yet arrived. The day was going well, the food tasted like food, the work had a rhythm. Then the phone stayed quiet for an hour longer than expected, and somewhere inside the chest, the wind changed direction. Doubt first, then a low fear. By evening, they are a different person, and they have not seen the door through which they were taken. Marcus saw this everywhere. A senator whose face changed when the emperor's did. The soldier who fell apart at an officer's scowl. There was the friend who could not enjoy his own dinner if a guest had not yet praised it. People who lived, in some real sense, outdoors. Entirely exposed to the weather of other people's faces, with no place to step inside when the weather turned. He set out, slowly and on purpose, to build the opposite of that. He wanted an inside, a room within himself that other people could not reach without his permission. He did not call it a fortress in any obvious way. But the architecture he was sketching, in his private notes over many years, was the architecture of a fortress. With foundations, walls, and a single narrow door he kept the only key to. He drew on a word the Romans already knew. Citadel, the small fortress built on the highest ground of a town, the last place to hold when everything below had been overrun. When the walls of the city fell, the citizens would retreat there. When the citadel itself fell, the city was lost. Marcus took that idea and quietly moved it inside himself. The hilltop was no longer made of stone. The siege had a different shape. How is such a thing built? It is built slowly, by hand, with the practices already named. The discipline of perception laid the foundation. Since a fortress has to be built on the right ground, on facts, not on stories about facts. The dichotomy of control rose as walls, dividing what could be allowed in from what would have to stay outside. The view from above raised the roof. Death meditation removed every piece of furniture nobody takes with them. What life looks like inside the citadel is hard to describe to someone outside it. The same insults still arrive. The same losses still come. The phone still goes quiet. But the events meet walls now instead of skin. Marcus could be slandered in the streets of Rome and walk home calm, not because he was numb, but because the part of him that the slander was aimed at was no longer where it used to be. This is important enough to say plainly. The citadel is not a wall against feeling. Marcus wept at the deaths of his children. He felt the cold of the frontier. He missed his wife when she died badly, openly. What the citadel protects is something more specific, the part of you that decides what those feelings are going to mean. The grief is welcomed in. It is just no longer permitted to take over the government inside. You may have met someone like this without naming it. The colleague who refuses to be undone by a passive-aggressive email. The mother who stays steady while her teenager rages. The friend whose composure during a crisis you mistook for coldness until you realized it was architecture. Their feet are on different ground. The storm hits them and somehow keeps going, the way wind hits a wall. Almost no one builds the citadel because the building is invisible. There is no obvious reward for the first 10 years of work. You read a passage, you sit quietly. You watch a thought arrive and choose not to follow it, and externally nothing has changed. The room is being built behind your eyes, brick by silent brick. And most people give up because they were waiting for fireworks. The fireworks never come. The wall comes. At the end of life, when youth and health and the recognition of strangers and even the company of friends have all been stripped away, the citadel is the only thing still standing. Marcus died slowly. In a tent, in winter, 50 miles from the nearest city he had built. What remained by then was the small lit room behind his eyes, the one piece of him he had built himself, and it had not been taken. Build inside. The work is slow, and one day the room will be the only place you have left. Chapter 7. The fire that burns the one who holds it. There is a particular silence that follows an angry sentence. The room is the same. The people in it are still the same. But something has been broken that no one in the room yet has the words for. 5 minutes earlier, the angry person felt powerful. Now they are looking at their hands and at the face across from them, and the power is gone, and what has come in its place is the small, cold feeling of having damaged something it will take weeks to repair. Marcus wrote about anger more than any other emotion in his journal. He came back to it again and again, sometimes in the same week, the way a man keeps checking a wound. He considered it the most destructive force in human life, not because it was the most painful, because it was the best disguised. It convinces you that it is your strength when it is actually a small announcement that your strength has just left the room. The illusion is what makes anger so hard to drop. Inside it, you feel large. Your voice has a new register. The other person becomes suddenly clearer to you. Wrong, smaller, deserving, and a clean, burning energy moves through you. This sensation is so close to power that almost no one separates them. But what is happening beneath the heat is the opposite. The horse has bolted with you on it, and the speed feels for a moment like skill. Marcus trained himself to catch anger in its earliest stages, before it became him. He learned the warning signs in the body. Heat in the chest, the jaw tightening, the next breath coming shorter and faster. By the time anger had finished arriving, it was too late. You would have to wait for it to leave on its own. The work was earlier. The work was when the bell first rang. He developed moves for the moment the bell rang. He would imagine the person who had angered him as a child, who had once cried for reasons no one understood. He would consider that the offense might not be aimed at him, that the man had a bad night, a sick child, a mind he was carrying like an injury. None of this excused the behavior. It just kept him from feeding the fire while he thought. He also borrowed a trick from the view from above. He would ask how much this particular flare of anger would matter in a week, in a year, in 10 years. The answer was almost always very little or nothing. The anger was demanding huge ground, but the cost it would charge was huge too, and most of what it was so urgent about would be invisible by the next season. Our time has built machinery for amplifying anger that Marcus could not have imagined. The driver who would have grumbled and let it go in his own age now sits inside a steel box and uses it like a weapon. The disagreement that would have ended with two people walking away now lives forever in a comment thread, where 1,000 strangers add fuel. The fire that used to burn out in an evening now has a generator. The cost of this is paid by the angry person more than anyone else. The marriage that quietly drained over 5 years of small wars. The career derailed by one email sent too quickly. The nights of sleep lost rehearsing arguments with people who were already asleep. The fire burns the hand that holds it, even when it lands on the face it was thrown at. Marcus understood this with an impatience that comes from having tested it on himself. Marcus finally noticed that anger almost never tells the truth about itself. The man yelling about a small infraction at work is rarely angry about the infraction. He is afraid of being seen as weak, afraid of losing his job, hurt that someone close to him has stopped paying attention. Under the heat, almost every time, is something cooler and more vulnerable. Marcus learned to ask the heat what it was covering for, and to address that instead. Mastering anger does not mean killing it. The body will always send up heat when something matters. The change is what comes next. The person who can feel the heat without acting on it has gained something most people never gain. The ability to choose, in a moment of full provocation, what kind of person to be. That ability, Marcus believed, was as close as a human being could get to actual strength. The next time you find yourself about to win an argument by losing your temper, notice what you are actually trading for the victory. Chapter 8. What stands in the way becomes the way. Picture a man walking quickly down a hallway, certain of his destination, who turns a corner and walks straight into a wall. The wall is unexpected. It is also solid. Most people in that moment do one of two things. They argue with the wall, yelling at it, blaming it, going over the same square inch of stone with the same complaint, as if the right complaint might persuade it to move. Or they turn around and go back, having decided that the destination is no longer available. Marcus discovered slowly that there was a third move. The wall, he wrote, becomes the path. What stands in the way becomes the way. It is one of the most quoted lines from his journal, and it is almost always misunderstood as a kind of inspiration. The principle is quieter and more practical than people think. The obstacle is not the interruption of your real life. It is the shape your real life is now wearing. This is not optimism. Marcus would have considered that a kind of soft lie. The wall is real. The thing on the other side of it is no longer available to you. What changes when this principle is taken seriously is your position relative to the wall. The obstacle becomes the only material you actually have to work with this morning. You stop asking the universe for a refund. He had to live this. The Antonine Plague broke out during his reign and killed somewhere in the millions. The quiet philosophical reign he had imagined never arrived. What arrived instead was emptied palaces, mass graves, frontier wars that never quite ended. He could spend his years grieving the reign he was supposed to have, or he could put his hands on the one he actually had. The first option was not on the table. He had to live this on the frontier too. He spent most of his reign in military camps along the Danube, fighting tribes whose names history has mostly forgotten. He had not been raised for war. He preferred books. The frontier was the curriculum he was given, and he wrote his most famous philosophy on wax tablets, between battles, by lamplight, in tents he had not chosen. You may know this principle without knowing his name for it. The illness that derailed someone's career, who eventually built something better. The lost job that opened a different door. The relationship that ended, forcing the painful work of becoming a person who could love. None of this is automatic. The obstacle does not generously become the path on its own. Someone has to do the work, and most of the time the work is all there is. This is also not the same as being grateful for tragedy. Marcus was not grateful for the plague. He did not write thank you notes for his children's deaths. There is a difference between accepting reality and applauding it. He accepted that the world was now this shape. He did not pretend the shape was beautiful. The work was inside the shape, regardless of how he felt about it. There is an old image that comes close to what he meant. A river meets a boulder in its bed. The river does not argue with the boulder, or declare it unfair, or wait for it to leave. The river finds where to go next, and continues to be a river. The shape changes around the boulder, but the river does not stop. It stops only when it stops finding where to go next. What most of us do instead is sit beside the boulder. We complain to the boulder. We rehearse our grievance to friends, to ourselves, to imaginary audiences. We lose months and sometimes years to the argument with something that is not going to argue back. The boulder is already there. It is not going to apologize. The only question is whether the river keeps moving or stops. Marcus's discovery, written down over many years, was that no untouched version of your life is waiting on the other side of the obstacle. There is only the life that includes it. Lived with skill or lived without, the plague was his life. The frontier was his life. The death of his children was his life. He did not love any of these things. He simply stopped arguing with them long enough to do the work in front of him. Whatever stands in your way today is the work today actually has for you. It will not look like the work you wanted. It rarely does. Chapter 9. The River That Never Comes Back. Stand by a river for an hour and watch the water you are looking at disappear. The river holds its shape. The banks stay where they are. But every drop you saw a moment ago is already half a mile downstream, on its way to a sea you will never visit. You have been watching the river as if it were a fixed thing. The river has been quietly fleeing past you the whole time. This is also true of the room you are sitting in. It is also true of you. Marcus came back to this thought often. A Greek named Heraclitus had said it centuries before him. You cannot step in the same river twice, because by the second step, both the river and you are different. Marcus carried the line further. You cannot step in the same hour twice. You are not the same person now, finishing this sentence, as the one who began it. The change is too small to see and too constant to stop. Most of life, he noticed, is spent looking everywhere except at the river. The mind drifts into memories upstream. Yesterday's conversation, last year's mistake, the version of yourself who lived in a different city, and then into projections downstream, next week's deadline, next year's worry, the version of yourself you would prefer to be, the water passing right in front of you, which is the only water you actually have, you mostly miss. He gave examples of what we miss. The conversation at dinner, lost because part of us was already at tomorrow's meeting. The walk with someone we love, present in our shoes, but somewhere else in our head. The bath, the meal, the warmth of a room, all happening to a body that was not in any sense inhabited at the time. Whole hours pass while we are technically alive in them. They count as lived only in the loosest sense. Time, he discovered, is the strangest currency we own. We treat it as if we had unlimited reserves and could spend it later. There is no later, there is only the next hour, which is also a present hour while we are inside it, which will also slip away while we are still deciding how to spend it. By the time you have a plan for your time, most of your time has already left. The discipline Marcus practiced for this was simple to describe and hard to execute. He learned to notice when his mind had left the room. The senator was still speaking. His own body was still in the chair, but his attention had wandered into the next campaign, the last argument, the letter he had not yet written. He brought it back, gently. The way you bring back a dog that does not understand why it should not chase the squirrel. We have built a world that makes this discipline almost impossible. There is a small machine in our pockets that is engineered to take our attention out of the room. We eat without tasting because we are reading. We walk without seeing because we are scrolling. We talk to people without quite arriving where they are. And they do the same to us, and an entire dinner can pass without anyone fully showing up at it. Marcus saw something further, though. Because everything is passing, the dinner, the conversation, the warmth of the room, the people you love. Presence is the only way to actually have any of it. You cannot store the meal for later. You cannot save the hand on your shoulder. You can only be inside it while it is happening, or not be, and most of us choose, by accident, not to be. There is a paradox in this. The people who accept impermanence most fully, the dying, the old, those who have stopped denying loss, are often the most present people you will ever meet. They are not trying to make the river stop. They are not pretending the moment will repeat. They have given up that fight, and the giving up has freed them. They are simply more here than the rest of us. Marcus's conclusion came back, in different words, dozens of times in the journal. The past has already gone. You cannot live there. The future has not arrived, and you do not own it. The only place you have ever lived is right here, in this exact slice of attention, and the slice is moving. To refuse to stand inside it is to refuse to live, because you would prefer some other life. That other life does not exist. Look, briefly, the river you are standing in right now is the only one that will ever carry you. Chapter 10. The Citizen of a Larger City. Toward the end of his life, Marcus stopped writing as if he were alone. The earlier pages of his journal had a particular voice, a man arguing with himself, scolding himself, talking himself, through the next morning. By the later pages, something has shifted. The arguments have quieted. The voice has gotten wider. He still writes in the first person, but the I has thinned, and the we, meaning everyone alive, everyone dead, everyone not yet born, has begun showing up in its place. Something had crossed inside him. He had stopped seeing himself as an individual standing against the world, defending his small patch of self from everything trying to take it. He had begun seeing himself as a part of the world, temporarily wearing a particular face, particular memories, a particular name, but made of the same material, governed by the same logic, headed for the same return as every other thing that lives or has ever lived. The Stoics had a word for what he was settling into. Logos. It is not a god, and not a new age idea about the universe loving you. It is simply a recognition that the world is structured, that there is a logic running through the movement of stars and the chemistry of bodies and the unfolding of thought, and that whatever you are made of something the rest of existence is also made of. The practical effect of this is enormous. If you and the people around you are made of the same stuff, governed by the same logic, then their welfare and yours are not separate equations. The traditional moral teachings, be kind, be just, be honest, read differently from here. They look less like rules pressing in from outside and more like a description of how anything in this network actually works. From here, the meaning of fellow human being shifts. Your neighbor stops being someone who happens to live next door. The stranger on the train stops being a foreground for your private film. The difficult colleagues stops being a problem to be removed. They are all, in this view, brief expressions of the same logic that briefly expressed you. You owe them what you owe yourself. Care that is not optional, attention that is not transactional. Service, in Marcus's view, came out of accuracy rather than duty. Once you see correctly, you act correctly. He governed 60 million people the way a sailor handles a borrowed boat, carefully, because the boat was not his and would belong to someone else soon. He spent 40 years working from that as the basic fact, and never confused his position with his identity. You may have brushed against this without naming it. The moment when you stop seeing your colleagues as rivals and recognize them as people working with you on the same brief problem of being alive. The moment a stranger's grief enters you as if it were your own. The instant of recognizing yourself briefly in someone you had assumed was nothing like you. Marcus would say those moments are perception leaking through. Brief, accurate contacts with how things actually are. All the earlier work folds into this. The discipline of perception, the inner kingdom, the view from above, the practice of presence. Each one was a piece of building yourself into someone who could finally take part in something larger without dissolving into it. The citadel had a door, and the door opened outward. You built the inside so that you could finally stand in the outside without being torn apart by it. The image he came back to in the final years was a small one, a brief flame. He saw himself as a flame that had been lit out of a larger fire. The same fire that lit every other person, every other animal, every other star burning at this moment, and would, in time, go back into it. The flame was simply the fire, briefly visible in one particular shape. At the end, the man dying on the cold frontier was no longer the man who had begun the journal 40 years earlier. In his younger years, he had fought an inner war, defending a small territory against the storms of being alive. The fighting had quietly stopped. He had come to see that the self he had been defending was never separate from the storms. The work had become to recognize, accurately, what he was already part of. Most people never arrive at this, but the work is available to anyone who begins it before the end. Every life arrives, sooner or later, at the same fork in the road Marcus walked. You can spend it defending a small piece of self against everything that comes for it. Or you can spend it doing the slower, harder work of recognizing what you were never separate from. Both options are difficult. Only one of them, in the end, turns out to be worth the effort. If any of this has stayed with you, closer to recognition than to instruction, there is more coming. Other figures. Other lifetimes that worked at the same question, in different rooms, in different centuries. The question Marcus left, in a journal he never meant for anyone to read, is the same question he is leaving for you. Not what you will do tomorrow. Not what you will achieve in the years remaining to you. Something quieter. While you still have the time, what, in the end, are you planning to be a part of?